His arms trembling under the strain of muscle fatigue and the icy cold in the dreary night, Michael thrust his frosted, heavy bedroom window open, hoping no one heard the loud screeching of metal on metal. He hoisted himself up, painfully crawled through the cramped opening, then landed on the suddenly iron-hard carpet with a loud thud. He laid there for a moment, exhausted, his limbs and gut sore, feeling as if he might vomit. He knew he couldn't go very much longer with a lack of sleep, and desperately needed to come up with a more effective plan. Michael did, in truth, need Teddy in order to sleep as of recently, and he was terrified that his nightmares were returning. He didn't want to announce or hint at his nightmares in any way, including getting caught using Teddy, in fear that he would have to go see doctors and shop for medicine, which would take valuable time away from searching for Fritz, as well as whatever plan he could conceive regarding sleeping during the day without raising suspicion. Everything was hard enough as it was. Michael forced himself to his feet, then closed the window, more gently than when he had opened it. He started toward his bed, hoping to fall asleep quickly. Then he remembered something, stopping dead in his tracks. He hadn't seen Dad all day, and was gripped with a sudden, relentless, malevolent dread.
Surely he's back by now. Why am I so nervous about this? He probably just had to go to work early and forgot to leave us a note like he usually does.
Michael clumsily tiptoed down the dark, enveloped hallway, making his way towards Dad's room. He carefully grabbed the cold doorknob and slowly turned it. Opening the door as quietly as he could, he peeked inside. The autumn-styled bed laid against the brown wall, a picture of a lush, multicolored forest hanging above it. The bed was neatly made, and the room perfectly tidy.
Empty?
Michael glanced around the shadowy room, his nerves shot, hair standing on end as his mind kept weaving the blackness to resemble various images of Dad, Thomas, Jenna, or a horrifically contorting, bloodthirsty, metallic monstrosity. Despite his mind's vigorous attempt to make sense of the scenery before him, he could not truly find anyone real inside the room. Michael stared at the drab bathroom door at the other end of the room, trying to see past the imaginary white static and red, glowing eyes. The light was off inside. Surely no one could be in there. Although still worried, Michael didn't know where else to look. He decided to just give up. He closed the door, tiptoed back to his room, then fell asleep, hoping Dad would show himself in the morning. The beautiful golden sun rays gleamed through the bundled pine needles that rattled in the soft wind, casting glittery specks that danced across the otherwise dreary asphalt. Jack leaned against the scuffed, dark red door of his car. He glanced at Kelly, whose shoulder leaned against his. She had just asked, "Do you believe in God?" Jack had pondered, not knowing how to respond. His mind kept returning to his childhood, the unbearable hardship, the excruciating pain, the deafening screams, the sharp and blunt objects racing across his sorrowful mind. Eventually, he shrugged. Honestly, I don't know what to believe. Kelly seemed concerned. What about the soul? Jack thought for another moment, then shrugged again. I don't know about that either. Kelly cringed in confusion. Why is that? Jack turned his gaze toward the hulking, concrete edifice of his apartment building. If God does exist, he's very cruel. He lowered his gaze to the ground. At least, to some people. He thought, including me. After a moment of silence, Kelly asked, You made it, didn't you? Jack glanced back at Kelly in confusion. What do you mean? Kelly shrugged. You made it out, right? And you're with me now. Memories flashed through Jack's mind a second, excruciating time, but with a new realization. Kelly was right. Despite everything previously in his life, he still had a happy ending that he would not trade for anything. Being with Kelly was substantially more than worth enduring his past life, his childhood, his suffering, everything. After another awkward moment of silence, Kelly suddenly started forward, then stumbled on her own 2 feet, nearly falling. Jack pushed himself from the side of his car, flying out his hands. Are you okay? Kelly regained her footing, and then smiled at Jack. Yeah, I'm okay. Suddenly, her smile died as if it were never there at all. No. Jack, I need you to help me. Jack kept his hands suspended, preparing to support her by the shoulders. Okay? Kelly stated worriedly. I need you to help me. Confused and worried, Jack firmly placed his hands on Kelly's shoulders, ignoring that she appeared perfectly stable. I'm here. I got you. What's wrong? Kelly, in some way Jack couldn't see, stumbled again. Jack flinched in response as Kelly's head crashed against his chest. He clasped his arms around her as she gazed up at him, blood seeping from her eyes as the color drained from her once brown irises. Her voice urgent, crying, terrified, on the verge of screaming. Jack, I need you to help me. Jack lurched awake, darting his eyes around to get his bearings. He was sitting in the front seat of his car, which still stood in the parking lot of Freddy's. He rubbed the red mark left by his neglected seatbelt that he kept forgetting to cut, pondering the strange feeling he had in his dream. He felt like he had experienced it before, but couldn't put his finger on it. Then, it came to him. Jack recalled his unusual encounter with the broken, foxy animatronic. How upon leaving the restaurant, he felt as if he were leaving something behind. His dream gave the same feeling. Then, he remembered Kelly's words. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in the soul? The feeling. Could she be? Jack shook his body as if waking himself up a second time, thinking, there is no soul, no God, no miracles. I'm just tired. Jack glanced at his wristwatch, hoping he hadn't slept for too long. It had only been a few minutes since he left the building. With a sigh of relief, he thought, I still have enough time to meet my friends. Jack started his car, shifted it into gear, then pulled out of the parking lot. the feeling of loss lingering in his aching mind. As the army of children intermixed in the courtyard of the tall building, exhausted Michael and Jenna sat on the bench near the small playground that had become their unspoken meeting place. For a while, there was silence, the two kids staring off into the distance toward the multicolored swing set and sandbox, until Jenna nervously asked,
"What do we do now?"
It was a difficult question. What was there to do when the culprit had covered their tracks too well for Michael to follow? Was there anything he could do? Was there anything he could even attempt? With a lump in his throat, Michael responded,
"I'm not sure. I think, at least, we should search the other areas."
Jenna nodded slowly, tiredly.
"Okay, you're sure?"
Michael had expected her to protest leaving Fritz's last known location. It showed how tired she truly was. He replied,
"Definitely, but I'm not sure what order we should search in."
Jenna turned her head toward Michael, her bloodshot eyes widening.
"What do you mean? Does it matter?"
Michael nodded, turning his gaze to Jenna.
"Yes, we don't know what order he covered his tracks in. Wouldn't it be from first to last?"
Michael pondered Jenna's question. Certainly, the culprit had only recently returned to the scenes, seeing as Michael and Jenna had already scavenged the woods for a long time and never came across him, despite the trail disappearing in just one day. However, the important question was, what order was the man covering his tracks in? It would make sense to cover the tracks of the earliest scenes first, because those were the first to be discovered and investigated. Although, the scenes of the most recent areas would be more fresh, so it would also make sense to be concerned about those giving better clues. Which was more likely to contain clues of Fritz's whereabouts? Or, at the very least, point in the right direction? Michael felt that covering the tracks in the reverse order of occurrence made the most sense because of the fresher traces, but he didn't know how to be sure. Then, Michael realized that Fritz's disappearance was the first to occur, and he knew for a fact that the kidnapper had gotten rid of all the clues there, meaning that the culprit must have been covering the tracks in order of occurrence. That meant that the chronologically second area would be in the most danger of having evidence removed. No, the previous night Michael and Jenna had spent at Fritz's area of disappearance without incident, meaning the kidnapper had an entire other day to have gone untampered with evidence in another scene already, assuming they were getting rid of it during the day, judging by the fact that the gap between when Michael and Jenna found the traces and when they disappeared is mostly during the day, and it would take time to erase such elaborate marks. So, likely, the third location was still untouched, and the most likely to be erased. That made sense to Michael. He hoped that he was still able to think properly enough despite his lack of sleep. However, even if that was the correct order, then there was still no guarantee that Michael and Jenna could make it there in time, since it was likely going to be targeted next. They could get there after the traces had already been removed, depending on how quickly the mysterious man could get to their tracks and cover them. Michael reiterated to himself that it would take time, but realized that if they caught him in the act, they were unsure of how to deal with the encounter. Plus, if he turned out to live near the area, unlike Michael and Jenna, Maybe he could at least erase the most important of the evidence before their arrival. It was worth keeping in mind that the culprit had already been faster than them, and if they could clear everything before nighttime, then Michael and Jenna would definitely get nothing from it. If that was the case, then the most recent areas would have the highest chance of still harboring clues, assuming the culprit was limited in how much evidence they could erase within certain time frames, to the point where there was still any left at all. Michael realized that last part was right. The culprit could have help, making Michael's entire thought process of the time frames irrelevant. He believed that was unlikely, though. Plus, if the scenes were instead cleared in the reverse order of discovery, then it was likely that Fritz's area of disappearance was the last to be covered up, and therefore all the others had already been cleaned beforehand. That would explain another mystery, why the kidnapper took so long to begin covering their tracks. It would turn out that they didn't, and they had the ability to do so quicker than Michael thought after all. Seeing as the culprit had constructed a plan, it would stand to reason that they would act immediately, leading Michael to believe that that was the more likely scenario than the alternative. It was possible that there was some reason they would benefit from waiting, but Michael certainly could not think of it. Or perhaps the man wasn't covering his tracks based on order of occurrence at all. Maybe it was an order from the most important to least important implications, or closest to furthest from his residence, or following some order that was solely intended to be confusing, or just an illogical order that Michael couldn't come up with that only makes sense to whoever had conceived the plan. Maybe it was completely random and the culprit wasn't going by any plan at all, and the real reason they waited so long to cover their tracks could be that they only just thought of it, making Michael's entire thought process completely pointless. Or maybe he was following Michael and Jenna in the woods and cleaned up afterward, basing the clear order on that. That was unlikely. If he was following anyone, it was the police, who undoubtedly had more evidence and expertise than Michael and Jenna ever would. And if the man did somehow find out where they were searching, it was most likely not by following them. That was all assuming that the culprit or an accomplice is even the one who erased the evidence in the first place. Michael figured it made the most sense that way, but there was no way of knowing for sure. Jenna cocked her head. "Michael?" It took Michael a moment to remember Jenna's question that sparked his whole thought process. Then, he shook his head. "I'm not sure how to tell. Which one do you think has the highest chance of there being clues left?" "I think maybe the most recent area," he thought. "Certainly, that's the most likely to have evidence. But the third place is the most likely to have it removed soon." It suddenly occurred to Michael that he had made an error. Perhaps he did need more sleep to properly construct a plan. If the culprit was, in fact, destroying evidence in the daytime, then he could have been doing so as Michael and Jenna had been speaking, making the third area already useless, and the fourth one next in line. Would it be better to go to the fourth or fifth location? There was no guarantee either way. Michael decided that they needed, more than anything, something instead of nothing, so they should go to the most recent area, even if it had only a slightly higher chance of being disturbed than the fourth location, once again assuming that the reverse order of occurrence was the correct one. Jenna stood up unsteadily, almost teetering. "Well then, let's go there, tonight." Michael shook his head. "But even if we find tracks there, there's a possibility that we could miss clues in the middle." Jenna stared, confused, then sat back down on the bench as her sleep-deprived mind slowly processed Michael's seemingly complicated words. Oh, well then I don't know. Michael pondered again, going over his previous logic. If there was no guarantee that there would be anything at any of the areas, because there was no way of knowing exactly what order the man decided to erase the evidence in, then there was no way of knowing the best decision. But could there still be a way to narrow down the possibilities? Michael closed his eyes, going deep into thought, visualizing everything he knew about the scenes. Then, picturing the areas on a map in his mind, he realized something. The two most recent areas were close enough to his and Jenna's houses that maybe they could decently search both in one night. He opened his eyes, letting out a sigh. If nothing else, the most recent area will have the freshest tracks, if they're there. I think we should start there, and if we look for a while and there's nothing, then we'll go to the next to last area. I know that if the fourth one is gonna be erased next, then going there first would seem smarter, but we don't really know the order for sure, and I think the latest area is still the best bet for the most clues that haven't been messed with. And we want to avoid encountering the culprit alone in the woods at night, if we can at all. He shivered at the thought. Plus, if he's in fact not clearing in the order I'm guessing, there won't be any evidence anywhere, or anything we can even do about it anyway. We just have to hope. Would we have time to do that? Michael shrugged. Those places are closer to us than where we were looking before, and close enough together that, yes, I think, if we manage our time correctly, we can search both a fair amount before daytime. He paused. Unless the culprit isn't covering his tracks by any plan. But since he's smart enough to make several people disappear so quickly, have it take so long for anyone to notice, and cover his tracks fairly properly afterward, I doubt he's improvising. He must have a precise plan, definitely thinking about what order the police will search in. I guess it comes down to what order he thinks that's in. Jenna stared blankly for a moment. He's smart? Probably. After a moment, Jenna asked, You're sure that's the best option? Michael shrugged again, thinking through his logic once more. To the best of my understanding. Jenna stared again for a minute, then nodded slowly. Okay. Michael thought to himself, Is it just me, or was it easier for me to convince her this time? She usually argues at least a little bit before agreeing, right? Maybe she's just tired? Or maybe she's even more unsure of what to do now than before? Suddenly, his eyes widened with realization. But hasn't she been giving in slightly easier each time? Memories of their past conversations and arguments flooded through his mind, leading him to believe that that must be right. Is she just getting more clueless? Or maybe she's losing her spirit. Giving up. Believing that that was the most likely possibility, he tried to sound reassuring through his raspy voice. We'll find him, Jenna. Jenna silently gazed at the drab sidewalk, her expression stating, I hope so, but I'm doubtful. Michael didn't want to tell Jenna that he shared her doubt. He wanted to find Fritz, but he knew the odds, and that he should leave it to the police. On top of their inexperience, they were clueless, exhausted, and couldn't continuously keep sneaking away for too much longer without getting caught. And what would they do if they encountered the kidnapper anyway? Maybe it really was just time to give up. End of chapter 7.